What if I told you some of Britain's most loved working class meals have completely vanished from our tables? Meals our grandparents once survived on are now forgotten by most of us. From cheap pies that fueled factory workers to quirky dishes born during rationing, these meals carried stories of survival, resilience, and community. Today, we're uncovering 10 working class meals that disappeared from Britain, and trust me, you won't believe some of them ever existed. Some of these will hit you right in the childhood. Others, well, you might thank your lucky stars you never had to eat them, but every single one tells our story, the real story. Not the one in the cookbooks, but the one that lived in millions of British kitchens. Number 1. Bread and dripping. Now, if you're under 40, you're probably thinking, dripping what? But trust me, your great nan is nodding somewhere. This was the original comfort food, and it cost absolutely nothing. Sunday roast is done, the beef's carved, the Yorkshire pud's demolished, everyone's arguing over who gets the last roast potato, but underneath that joint, that beautiful golden brown fat swimming with all those gorgeous meat juices, that's liquid gold right there. You'd pour it into a bowl and let it set overnight. By morning, you had this incredible savory jelly, dark brown on the bottom where all the meat juices settled, creamy white fat on top. The ritual was everything. Thick slice of yesterday's bread. None of this artisanal sourdough nonsense, just plain white bread that knew its place. You'd spread that dripping thick, like butter, but so much better. The salty, meaty richness would soak right into the bread. That hit of pure, concentrated Sunday roast flavor. A good crack of black pepper, maybe a pinch of salt if you were feeling fancy. It wasn't breakfast, it wasn't lunch, it was just sustenance. Pure, honest sustenance that tasted like a hug from the inside out. And here's what gets me. We threw away more flavor in our modern kitchens last week than our great-grandparents wasted in a year. Number 2. Dripping cake. But wait, because we're just getting started with the dripping magic, you didn't dare waste that precious fat. Oh no. In those days, waste not, want not wasn't just a saying, it was survival. So that dripping, it had another job to do. Dripping cake. Or dripper, if you were proper working class about it. Now, I know what you're thinking. Beef fat in a cake? That sounds absolutely mental. But hear me out, because this was genius level baking that your nan probably knew by heart. You'd cream that dripping just like butter, and honestly, it worked even better. Made the cake incredibly moist, gave it this deep, rich flavor that you just can't get from modern fats. Add your sugar, crack in an egg if you had one, fold in flour, and whatever dried fruit you could afford, usually currants, sometimes a handful of raisins if it was someone's birthday. The smell when it was baking like Christmas, and comfort, and making the best of everything, all rolled into one. It kept for days too, had to. You weren't making another cake until next Sunday's joint, wrapped in a tea towel, sitting in the pantry, ready to be sliced thick for packed lunches or afternoon tea. Modern baking shows would have a field day with this one, wouldn't they? Today, contestants, you'll be making a cake using beef drippings. The horror on their faces would be priceless. Number 3. Woolton Pie. Named after Lord Woolton, the Minister of Food during World War II. Poor bloke probably never imagined his legacy would be a vegetable pie that nobody actually wanted to eat. But here's what you've got to understand. This wasn't about taste, this was about survival, about feeding a nation when U-boats were sinking supply ships and every calorie counted. Picture a Britain where banana was just a memory, where meat was so rationed you'd queue for hours for a tiny chop, where sugar was more precious than gold. You grew what you could in your victory garden. Carrots that looked more like fingers, swede that could double as a weapon, potatoes with more eyes than a surveillance van. The pie itself? Look, I'm not going to lie to you, it wasn't exactly fine dining. You'd chop up whatever vegetables you had, and I mean whatever. Carrots, parsnips, swede, turnips, potatoes, maybe an onion if you were lucky. Chuck it all in a pie dish with some vegetable stock made from, well, probably more vegetables. Top it with pastry if you had enough fat and flour. If not, more potatoes, mashed and spread over the top like a blanket. The texture was challenging. Everything cooked down into this sort of savory, stodgy mess. But you know what? It was hot, it filled you up, and it meant your family wouldn't go to bed hungry while the bombs were falling. The minute the war ended, and I mean the minute, Woolton Pie vanished from British tables faster than you could say, welcome home. Can't say I blame them really. While the Woolton Pie vanished with the end of the war, other dishes were deeply rooted in a specific place and time. Number 4. Groaty Pudding. Let's head up to the Black Country, where they didn't mess about with fancy names or delicate flavors. This was food for people who worked with their hands and needed something that would stick. It was called Groaty Pudding, sometimes Groaty Dick if you were feeling informal. And before you snigger, remember, these were different times. This was the fuel of industrial Britain. Steel-cut groats, that's basically chopped oats, beef, onions, leeks, and thyme. Lots and lots of thyme. You'd start this thing in the morning before heading off to work. Everything went into one big pot. A pound of groats, chunks of cheap beef, usually shin or another tough cut that needed persuading, onions, leeks, maybe a carrot if you had one lying about. Cover it with water, add salt, and then just let it bubble away for hours. 6, 7, sometimes 8 hours of slow cooking until the groats broke down and absorbed all that beefy, oniony goodness. By the time you got home from the factory, your house would smell like heaven and your stomach would be rumbling like thunder. The final result? Think porridge's bigger, more muscular brother. Thick, dense, incredibly satisfying. You'd ladle it into bowls and eat it with a spoon, and one bowl would keep you going through a night shift at the foundry. It wasn't pretty food, it was practical food. Food that understood its job and did it without complaint. You can still find it in a few places around the Black Country if you know where to look, usually served at community events or traditional pubs that remember their roots. But it's becoming rarer every year. From the industrial heartland, let's head down to the old East End of London for a dish that's even more divisive. Number 5. Jellied eels. Here's how it worked. You'd catch eels from the Thames. Yeah, the Thames used to be absolutely teeming with them. Chop them into sections, bones and all. Boil them in a spice stock with bay leaves, lemon, and whatever herbs you had. The magic happened as it cooled. All that natural gelatin from the bones would set the cooking liquor into this. Well, this wobbly, savory jelly that encased chunks of eel. You'd eat it cold. Stone cold, with a splash of chili vinegar that would make your eyes water and your sinuses clear instantly. The texture, how do I even describe this? Imagine the firmest fish you've ever eaten, but with tiny bones that crunch between your teeth, all suspended in this savory aspect that dissolves on your tongue. Pie and mash shops used to sell mountains of the stuff. You'd queue up next to dock workers and market traders, all of them slurping down jellied eels like it was the most natural thing in the world. The nutritional value was actually incredible, packed with protein, omega oils, vitamins. These weren't people eating weird food for fun. They were eating brain food, survival food. Most of the eel and pie shops are gone now. Gentrification killed them faster than pollution killed the Thames eels. But there are still a few holdouts, usually run by families who've been doing this for generations. And you know what? If you can get past the texture and the idea of it, it's actually not bad. Properly made jellied eels have this clean, fresh taste that speaks of rivers and tides and London when it was still a working port. Number 6. Tripe and onions. Oh boy, here we go. If jellied eels made you queasy, tripe and onions is going to finish you off completely. But stay with me, because this tells such an important story about how we used to eat. How we had to eat. Tripe, well, let's not beat around the bush. It's the stomach lining of a cow. I know. But before you run away, remember that our ancestors couldn't afford to waste any part of an animal. Every scrap had to count. And tripe was cheap as chips and packed with protein. The preparation was everything. You couldn't just throw this stuff in a pan and hope for the best. It needed proper cooking. Long, slow, patient cooking that turns something tough and chewy into something, well, still pretty chewy, but in a good way. First, you'd clean it. And I mean really clean it. multiple washes, sometimes a bit of vinegar to help with the smell. Then you'd cut it into strips, these white, slightly spongy ribbons that honestly looked like something from a biology textbook, into the pan with milk. Always milk, never water. The milk would slowly break down the proteins and give everything this creamy, comforting base. Add your onions, sliced thick, bay leaf if you had one, salt, pepper, maybe a pinch of nutmeg if you were feeling fancy. Then you'd just let it simmer for hours. The milk would reduce down, the onions would go all sweet and soft, and the tripe would slowly become tender. Served up with mashed potatoes and maybe some thick slices of bread to soak up that milky, oniony sauce. It was actually proper comfort food. Every industrial town in the north had its tripe shops. Proper shops, mind you, not just a corner in the butcher's. Places that specialized in tripe and onions, maybe some elder and trotters if you were feeling adventurous. But here's the thing, tripe requires courage. Courage to try it, courage to cook it properly, and courage to admit you actually quite liked it. And somewhere along the way, we lost that courage. The last tripe shop in my hometown closed about 10 years ago. The owner was 70 odd, and nobody wanted to take over. Can't say I blame them really, but something was lost when that shop closed. A connection to our past, to a time when we knew how to make something from nothing. Number 7, faggots and peas. Faggots were the champions of nose to tail, eating before anyone called it that. They were born from the simple principle that if you're going to kill an animal, you use every bloody bit of it. Heart, liver, lungs, all the bits that modern eaters turn their noses up at, minced together with pork mince, onions, breadcrumbs, and herbs, usually sage, because sage and pork are like old married couple, they just belong together. But here's where it gets clever. You'd wrap each faggot in caul fat. That's the thin, lacy membrane that surrounds a pig's organs. Sounds horrible, tastes incredible. As the faggots baked, that caul fat would render down, basting the meat and creating this beautiful crispy skin. The smell when they were cooking, imagine Sunday roast, but more intense, more primal. The kind of smell that would drag you into the kitchen even if you weren't hungry. They'd come out of the oven, dark brown and glistening, sitting in a puddle of their own rich gravy, always served with mushy peas. Not garden peas, mind you, but proper marrow-fat peas that had been soaked overnight and cooked until they collapsed into this bright green mush. The combination was perfect. Rich, meaty faggots cutting through that sweet, starchy comfort of mushy peas. A bit of mash on the side to soak up the gravy, and you had a meal that would keep you going for hours. You can still buy faggots from some butchers, usually frozen ones that are about as authentic as a plastic Christmas tree. But the real deal, made fresh by someone who knew what they were doing, those are getting rarer every year. And that's a shame, because faggots represent something important. They're about using everything, wasting nothing, and turning the bits nobody wanted into something absolutely delicious. Number 8, pease pudding. You all know the rhyme. Pease pudding hot, pease pudding cold, pease pudding in the pot, 9 days old. Your mum probably sang it while she was making. Well, probably not pease pudding actually, because by the time most of us were kids, it had already started its slow fade into history. But up north, proper north, where they don't mess about with fancy names, this was essential eating, especially in Newcastle and the surrounding areas, where it was practically a food group. Yellow split peas, that's all it started with. Dried peas that looked like tiny wrinkled suns. You'd soak them overnight until they swelled up and softened, then boil them with a bit of bacon or ham until they collapsed completely. And I mean completely. This wasn't like modern cooking where everything has to keep its shape and texture. No, you wanted these peas to surrender entirely, to break down into this smooth, thick, savory paste. The color was incredible, this deep golden yellow that seemed to glow on the plate. The texture was like, imagine the world's most satisfying baby food, but for adults who worked with their hands and needed something substantial. It was always served with boiled ham or Saveloy sausages. The combination was perfect. Salty, smoky meat cutting through that dense, earthy comfort of the pease pudding. A bit of vinegar to brighten everything up, and you had a meal that cost pennies but filled you completely. The beauty of pease pudding was its keeping power. It would sit happy in the pantry for days, getting thicker and more concentrated as time went on. You could slice it cold, fry it up for breakfast, or thin it down with a bit of stock for soup. But, like so many of these dishes, it was tied to a specific time and place. As the heavy industries closed down and communities scattered, the knowledge of how to make proper peas pudding went with them. You can still find it in a few places. Some traditional pubs still serve it, and there are butchers who make it fresh, but it's becoming more of a novelty than a staple. A taste of the old days that most people sample once, nod appreciatively, and then forget about. Number 9. Saveloy Dip. This was street food before street food was cool. Before food trucks started selling gourmet grilled cheese for 15 quid, there were Saveloys. And if you knew where to go, you could get them served the proper way. A Saveloy, for those who've never had the pleasure, is like a hot dog's rougher, more honest cousin. Bright red skin that snaps when you bite it, filled with, well, let's just say mixed pork and leave it at that. They were cheap, they were filling, and they were absolutely perfect for people who needed food that could be eaten one-handed while walking to work. But the dip, that's where the magic happened. You'd get your Saveloy sliced lengthwise and slapped into a soft white roll. Nothing fancy, basic bread that knew its job and did it without complaint. But then came the dip. The chip shop or butcher would have these big roasting tins constantly bubbling away with the juices from whatever had been cooking that day. Beef drippings, pork fat, onion flavored stock, all mixed together into this dark, salty, incredibly savory liquid gold. Your Saveloy roll would get dunked, and I mean dunked, into that gravy. The bread would soak it up like a sponge, the meat would glisten, and you'd get this incredibly messy, incredibly satisfying sandwich that tasted like pure comfort. Eating it was an art form. You had to work fast before the bread disintegrated completely. One hand holding the sandwich, the other cupped underneath to catch the drips. It was messy, eating at its finest. This was particularly big on Tyneside, where dock workers and shipbuilders would queue up for their dinner. Men with hands like shovels, delicately maneuvering these soggy sandwiches while discussing football or complaining about the foreman. The culture around it was as important as the food itself. The banter with the server, the ritual of choosing exactly how much dip you wanted, the satisfaction of a hot meal that cost almost nothing. But as the industries died and the communities changed, the Saveloy dip faded too. You might find the odd place that still does them properly, but they're museum pieces now, relics of a time when food was fuel and comfort came in a soggy roll. Number 10. Corned beef hash. This dish tells the story of making something spectacular from almost nothing. Tinned corned beef, that dense, salty, slightly mysterious meat that came in those distinctive rectangular tins with the key attached to the bottom. During the war, tinned corned beef was a godsend. It kept forever, it was packed with protein, and it could be turned into a dozen different meals. But hash was the king of them all. The technique was everything. You'd start with leftover potatoes, and there were always leftover potatoes, because throwing away carbs was basically a crime. Dice them up small, nice and even. Heat up your biggest frying pan, and I mean hot. A splash of dripping or lard, because this was before we got scared of proper fats. In go the potatoes, and you'd leave them alone. This is crucial. You can't keep stirring and fussing. You want those potatoes to get properly golden and crispy on the bottom. While that's happening, you'd fork up your corned beef. Not too fine. You want chunks that you can actually taste. Maybe dice an onion if you had one. Some people added a bit of cabbage or whatever vegetables were lurking in the bottom of the larder. Then everything goes in the pan together. The corned beef, the onions, maybe a splash of Worcestershire sauce if you were feeling fancy. You'd stir it all together and then, again, leave it alone. Let it all get crispy and golden on the bottom, creating this incredible crust. The smell was intoxicating, salty, meaty, with those crispy bits of potato that tasted like pure comfort. You'd serve it straight from the pan, maybe crack an egg on top if it was payday, and eat it with thick slices of bread and butter. This wasn't restaurant food, this was home food. Food that said, we might not have much, but we're going to make it delicious. You still see versions of it on trendy brunch menus now, but they've usually fancified it beyond recognition. Artisan this, organic that, deconstructed the other. They've missed the point. entirely. The point was simplicity. The point was taking a tin of meat, some leftover spuds, and turning them into something that would make you close your eyes with satisfaction after the first bite. These dishes tell a story most people have forgotten, but it's only half the picture, because some meals weren't just working class. They were born from pure desperation. The 15 meals our grandparents ate to survive are on another level entirely. Click here if you think you could handle it, and subscribe now, because this is the history they don't put in the cookbooks.